Hi, my name is Jim Breen and I'm the host of 5 Great Scenes, a series that with each episode will take one movie from this collection behind me and dissect 5 scenes from that movie. 5 scenes that I love, that I think are great, to help understand the movie, to understand how the director achieved greatness in those scenes. Now, as you can see, I'm clearly a movie lover. I own 1,300 Blu-rays, but I'm also a visual storyteller. I've written 25 feature screenplays, a few of which have been optioned. I've directed movies ranging from 3 to 60 minutes, and I'm developing 2 comic series right now. So I love visual storytelling. So the other thing to be aware of is these are movies from cinema's past. So these are all older Blu-rays. They're just theatricals in the rearview mirror. I like to do older movies because I find that marketing and the zeitgeist kind of get in the way of really truly looking at a movie. So just be aware of that. And lastly, there will be spoilers in this discussion, so just know that ahead of time. If you haven't seen the movie, please watch the movie. If you're deciding on whether to watch the movie, maybe this will help convince you. Either way, spoilers ahead. So with that said, let's get into this episode's movie. So in today's episode, we'll be focusing on 1994's classic prison drama, The Shawshank Redemption, which was the feature directorial debut of Frank Darabont. The movie tells the story of a decades-long friendship between Andy Dufresne and Ellis Redding, Red to the other inmates at a prison in Maine, and focuses on an era between the mid-1940s and the late 1960s. It stars Tim Robbins as Dufresne, as Andy Dufresne, and Morgan Freeman as Ellis Redding, or Red to his other inmates. The cast is also includes Bob Gooten as the prison warden, sadistic prison warden. It stars Clancy Brown as a key prison guard, sadistic prison guard. It stars James Whitmore as an older inmate who's been institutionalized. It stars Gil Bellows, a younger inmate who was mentored by Andy. That was at one point. And it stars Mark Rolston, who plays a sadistic inmate who preys upon Andy. Now, the movie also, the unsung heroes of this movie are the 6 members of Andy and Red's entourage, so to speak. And you'll see in this image here, we have Joseph Ragno in the image on the edge there. We've got Brian Libby, and we've got David Preval. And then on the other side, in this next image, you'll see Larry Brandenburg next to Morgan Freeman, William Sadler, who's probably one of the more well-known ones, and Neil Giuntoli on the end there. Unsung heroes, but they do great work in this film. Now, this film was adapted from a novella inside a collection of stories or novellas in different seasons, Stephen King's different seasons collection of novellas. There were 2 other films made from the 4 novellas in there. Stand By Me, famously, was one of the more well-known ones, and At Pupil, which you'll see is part of my collection, directed by Bryan Singer, that isn't as well regarded, but is one that I love and has a great performance by Ian McKellen. As far as Darabont and King, Darabont, the only other job he had done as a director credited is Woman in the Room, which was a 30-minute short that he got the approval for $1 to he had the rights from King to make, as King does this for a lot of younger filmmakers, gives them rights for $1. And so he had made that one before Shawshank, and then he's made 2 other ones, which you'll see in these images here. He made The Green Mile, famously with Tom Hanks and Michael Clark Duncan, and that ensemble cast. And lesser well regarded is The Mist, more of a horror Stephen King adaptation with Thomas Jane and an ensemble cast. Um, I have a lot of really great memories for this movie. Most people saw this movie on cable. I saw it first weekend because I read this novella when I got the book to read Stand By Me. The body was the story that Stand By Me was adapted one from, and so I already knew Shawshank, and so I was there first weekend and absolutely loved it. Um, um, One of my favorite movies of that year. But I also attended AFI's master's, I attended an AFI master class when I was in their graduate program and the director's program there, and we got to watch the movie and talk to Darabont, and it was just a wonderful Q&A. I loved it. One of my favorites. Now, when I focus on the 5 scenes here that I want to do, I'm really focusing on the voiceover narration, how he uses voiceover narration to elevate or to punctuate scenes. That's what I really want to focus on here. Now, most people are unaware that this is the first voiceover narration that Morgan Freeman ever did. So it's his first job. And of course, very memorable. And it's hard to believe, since considering his career after this. So good casting is part of this, but I think um, also, Red is not just kind of a disconnected narrator. He has an arc of his own, and he is Andy's closest friend. And so that just emotionally, that voiceover takes so much. It's just so much more. It's much more weightier and more emotional, as well as being read by of course Morgan Freeman. Now, there's another movie that you might be interested in watching, that came out from the same studio, distributed from the same studio the same year, which is Legends of the Fall. Now, Legends of the Fall is also an adaptation of a novella, but the movies are eerily similar in just how each director, Edward Zwick with Legends of the Fall and Darabont with Shawshank, adapted this novella. They focus on kind of a family. In the case of Legend, it's an actual family as opposed to a surrogate family in a prison. They're very episodic in nature. It relies upon kind of montages in between these scenes to kind of show time passing. In the case of the Ludlows, it's not a prison, it's their home in Alaska. We keep cutting back to over decades. The movie also focuses on a tragic central character. Tristan Ludlow, famously played by Brad Pitt, is the central character, and he's more a physical specimen in touch with nature and kind of Native American culture, whereas Andy is more of an intellectual. That's where he excels, and so they're very similar in that way. But the difference in looking at Legends of the Fall focuses on has a narrator, One Stab, who is the Native American servant and kind of spiritual father of Tristan. He narrates Legends of the Fall, but he is a peripheral character who is kind of there to witness it and to keep the letters. And it's not that he's not important; we just don't delve deeper into him, so it's not as emotionally satisfying. I love Legends. Legends is great, but I think that this narration excels because of our connection to Red and his arc. So just if you're interested, definitely check that movie out. This be an interesting double feature. And last thing I'll say is that Roger Deakins shot this movie, and as from a feature directorial debut, I feel like he really elevated Frank Darabont's game. There's many cinematographers who do that with feature directorial. Connie Hall with Sam Mendes with American Beauty, for instance, is the first one that comes to mind. Searching for Bobby Fischer, Connie Hall also for Steven Zalin's second movie, just elevated his game, and I think that Deakins does some great work in here, which we'll touch upon. So with that said, let's jump into scene 1.
Scene 1.
So scene 1 is Andy's arrival at Shawshank, and it's the first time we hear narration, Morgan Freeman's narration. Now, as you'll see in this opening shot, we have Red stepping out into the yard, but Darabont is smart because we need a beat after Red has been refused parole and has been kind of subservient to the parole board to kind of collect himself. He takes that moment at the bottom of some stairs, so it gives him a private moment to collect himself real quickly. Very smart, and then walk up into the prison yard, right, where his entourage joins him, right, his group, or at least half his group, and he starts to walk across. And then he shows us, before telling us that he's a black marketer, one of his entourage comes up asking him for smokes very, very quickly. And then we get that wonderful, we get the narration, which is awesome, as he tells us who he is, what he does. But he uses this kind of slow motion hero shot, which is just awesome. And he doesn't use it, I don't think he uses it again for that character, but it's a great hero shot. Very smart. Then we cut back to real time, and we hear the siren go off. New prisoners are arriving. And more importantly, he tells us in the narration that he is going to get to know Andy Dufresne, and Andy Dufresne is going to ask him for Rita Hayworth in 1949. So he's setting up something's going to happen, right? Andy's coming to the prison. Something's going to happen. But then one of the most beautiful shots in the movie, and I'll show you a collection of images here, is that helicopter shot. Now, this is years before drones, obviously. It costs money to get a helicopter shot. But Darabont is doing two things here. He's showing you this beautiful prison that is just, I mean, the location managers, whoever locked that prison, I mean, just got so lucky, because this is a period movie, and this looks like an old prison. So it's doing a lot of work. But what this shot does is it shows our bus. So our bus takes us to the prison, which is awesome. Andy's taking us in, right? Andy's in that bus. But you also get production value, and he shows the audience what he's going to offer visually. But this wonderful helicopter shot going over the prison, showing all these prisoners. This is screaming production value. This is not your regular prison. And equally important to the voiceover is Thomas Newman's score. We get that beautiful score soaring through. So once again, he's telling the audience, this is not your regular prison movie. We're doing something different here. One of my favorite shots in the movie, and I just love that tracking shot. And what's great about what Deakins and Darabont do is that they take us around the prison and pick up the bus as it turns into the gate. And so that's awesome, right? So then we get all the prisoners running towards the gate very quickly. But more importantly, we cut to Andy inside the bus. We hear that voiceover again. Now Darabont is connecting us to that prologue, where the trial, by clarifying who Andy is, that Red knows this, and he uses that beautiful kind of push in on Andy as we tell this story. Once again, giving us intellectual context and how they're connected. Then we get kind of everyone in place at the gate, right? And we're getting shots through the windshield. We see Hadley, Clancy Brown's character, and a group of guards. More importantly, we see what kind of prison it is, because we get both geography and looking at down at the gate, and we get those the prison guards with those machine guns above. So this is a dangerous place. It sets it to be ominous. And then we get we're kind of cutting back and forth between Andy arriving, right, or them stepping out of the bus, being directed by Hadley, so to lining up. But more importantly, we get Morgan Freeman and his group, essentially. Now, in this group, Darabont doesn't want you to know everyone's name. He just wants to get the group dynamic. And so we get the group dynamic, and that Red is the leader. But they have that great, the architecture of this place works so well for them. It's clearly they probably, who knows if they built this gate but the gate is awesome in that um, it frames in the bus, which will be important in a second. But you get this great perspective towards the gate area from that elevated space with Red and his group as they talk about the fish kind of arriving and how they look. And then we get Andy stepping out, and notice that Andy is of course the largest person in this. Because Tim Robbins is tall, we get him standing in this group, but he stands out because he's the tallest in the group and very well dressed. And now the event of this scene, we talk about the event of the scene, and the event of the scene, I think it serves two purposes. A lot of the times events are one thing, but because these are two characters, it shows you Andy's arrival and his perspective. So first we get this collection of Andy walking in, and I don't know if the gate was built, probably was, of those prisoners on either side rattling the gate as he goes through. This kind of chaos, but we see Andy's point of view, how he sees the prison. So that's the first thing. The second thing though is we get them betting on who's going to kind of cry first, and so they each take their bets, and we get that voiceover again as Red looks at Andy, and we're choosing his point of view. We're choosing Red's point of view as he watches and he picks his fish from that vantage point. But we kind of see that Andy looks kind of pathetic, and that's probably in the direction where he's kind of slumping his shoulders and he looks fragile. And the other event of this scene is Red bets against Andy, right? He assumes who this man is, and that's the major event of this scene. And so we get that close-up, this great close-up as he bets on a very smart from Darabont's point of view, as he bets, and it pulls back and kind of shows the rest of the group. But it starts off with that close-up and then kind of dollies back to show the rest of the group as they make their final bets. While also in this scene singling out the fat man who's going to be crying in the next scene as well. He's also someone we place very, very quickly. But then we choose one of my favorite shots where Andy goes inside the prison, and we see him looking up as he enters that kind of ominous entrance. It's such great punctuation for the scene as we lead into him meeting the warden. So that is my scene number one. A very effective filmmaking and incredible use of narration. So let's talk about scene number two.
Scene 2.
So scene number two is the first 2 years, or the prison rape scene. This is really difficult. With a prison movie, you kind of expect this. So you weren't necessarily sure how Darabont was going to handle this. And he had led up to this by having Boggs proposition him and Andy in the shower. But we have this great, we're talking about routine, and we get that voiceover in the midst of the scene where Andy is told he's working in the laundry. We have him, that long, great, I think it's a Steadicam shot, as he walks through the laundry. You'll see the images here, right? Perfectly done. Then he goes into that supply area to get, I guess, some more soap, something along that lines. And Boggs, Mark Ralston's character, steps out. So we're given that we're setting up this expectation something bad's going to happen. Andy tries to defend himself. He grabs a bunch of the soap, and the group of Boggs's cronies fall upon him, and we get him getting beat, and he just gives the fight of his life. I love that part where he's grabbed in this scene, where he's grabbed on both sides, and he's and he's just fighting for his life before they throw him to the ground. It's such a great choreography because it just shows how hard that he is truly fighting. He's finally kicked. We see in this image, he's on the ground. We have them kicking him, and that's when the narration steps in. And rather than show anything, we then pull back, and we have that wonderful narration telling you what happened, so that we don't have to see it, but we know it exists, right? It has to be touched upon in a prison movie like this, especially with Andy. So we follow that slow, beautiful dolly shot back, maybe a steady cam, regardless, dolly shot back as it kind of shows that empty area. Then it starts talking about routine, and we hear that voiceover again and kind of have this what's wonderful about as punctuation for that scene. I talked about at the beginning punctuation. As punctuation for this scene, we have the voiceover used. And the thing you'll learn about this is with this movie that's important is that what Darabont realizes is that voiceover, as long as you're kind of staying on track for this kind of like this montage, that the music and that voiceover, where you can put any number of images there to show the progression of time, and that score, that beautiful score, and that narration takes us through as he talks about routine. We see the bruises as he walks. Right here, you'll see him walking in the winter, so a different season, time passing. We see him fighting again with the rake in hand, that desperation. Once again, awesome, right? And then we get the final shot, which is I love, as that machine closes, the top closes, and we have that kind of slightly looking up, and Andy looking just dejected, just looking defeated, essentially. And having, to me, that is such great punctuation for that kind of that montage after the rape scene, and just effective use of narration as we then click to the next chapter, where everything will change. Just really effective use of narration and handling a very sensitive subject when you talk about prison movies. Expertly done. So that's scene number 2. Let's talk about scene number 3.
Scene 3.
So now it's time to talk about scene 3. Now this was really difficult because last time I chose 2 scenes that kind of did the same thing and had 6 scenes with taps. And so with this one, I want to do 5. I had to choose one of 2. I liked the opera scene, but the rooftop tarring scene won out. And I'll tell you why. Up until this point, Andy Dufresne is kind of seen as eccentric. He likes rocks. He's intelligent, cultured. But we feel sorry for him. I mean, he's been raped multiple times by Boggs. He's not in a happy place now. He's had, we talk about his miserable first few years. And so this scene, we get a sense of Andy's superpower, right? We finally see him stand out. And so the scene starts off with some narration, leading into this. You'll see in this image here, you'll see this bucket of tar, and some prisoners down below, leading up towards the roof of this building, right, where Red and Andy and his group are tarring the roof. This is a plum position that Red had to bribe people for. But we're seeing them in the background because Hadley, the vicious, sadistic prison guard, he is talking about an inheritance. He's inherited money from a brother that he thought was deceased, and so $35,000, and he's just pissed off. So he's got his group of lackeys around him, and we see it's beautifully staged because you can see our prisoners in the background, kind of halfway down, with Hadley and his group in front. So perfect framing, staging, so they can overhear the conversation. And so we hear Hadley. We hear the Red and William Sadler making fun of him, and they're given these quick singles on Andy as he's overhearing as well and not saying anything, right? He's silent while the others are joking around. Now he's hearing all these lackeys coming up with ways to make this positive for Hadley, right? You can tell the director telling the actors, try to convince him, try to, comfort him, try to come up with, reason with him. But Hadley, won't hear anything, right? He's pissed off. And this is the man with a very short temper, remember. So this next moment surprises us all at this moment is Andy puts down his mop and starts to walk towards them, right? Towards Hadley and the guards. And instantly we're alarmed because, of course, Red is alarmed and the other prisoners are alarmed. What the hell are you doing, right? We walk up. He crosses very silently. The guards don't notice him until he's right on them, and then they cock those guns. Suddenly there's danger in this scene, right? It's palpable because Hadley's hit a guy in the stomach with a billy club for asking for food, and hit somebody upside the head for screaming on his first night, the fat man who died, and felt no remorse for killing this man accidentally. So Hadley's dangerous, and so Hadley turning him and say, "What the fuck are you doing?" And the first thing out of Andy's mouth is, of course, "How much do you trust your wife?" Once again, he's surprising us, right? And we're like, okay, this is getting dangerous very quickly. Is this suicide? Like, what is he doing? We have this quick exchanges as the prisoners are watching, but we have these singles on both very quickly as Hadley is threatening him, and Andy won't let it go. So Hadley says, "Time for you to have a fucking accident," right? This guy's going over the side, and so we have him pushing him towards the edge of the roof, out of the line of sight of the camera here, but we're at a new position. And we see this great rush up towards the edge of the roof, choosing that POV and I think a handheld or a Steadicam shot, going towards the edge as Andy quickly explains himself. "I think you can keep the $35,000. Boom, right? Hadley stops, and we have this great shot of looking down looking down below with Hadley holding him. You'll see in this image here, Hadley holding him ready to drop him. And of course, Frank Darabont makes a point of putting prisoners below, looking up at him, shocked, to get a sense of distance. How far is it? Essentially, perspective. Very smart. And then that kind of the camera goes down and becomes kind of more of a two-shot, and then circles around to grab our prisoners. And with a lot of cinematographers, that might be just a great shot. But this, it's warranted. It's needed, right? It's right for the moment. And so you have this great shot as they go, and then you have basically these back and forths as Andy convinces Hadley that there's this tax code he can use to give this gift to his wife, and slowly convincing him that it's his idea, Hadley's idea, just being subservient to him. And we have these quick shots as we see that the danger's lessening and that Hadley's actually listening, even though he's still pissed off because he's Hadley. And then Andy doing this wonderful thing of, "I'll do it for you. I'll set up this fund. I'll set up the tax forms for you. If you give my coworkers some beers, because nothing says beer, like working on a roof than having cold beers, right? Or something along that lines." And one of the guards laughs and says coworkers, but it's such a great end of that scene and Hadley agreeing with it. But then the narration adds punctuation to this scene, right? And so we have the shot of our kind of entourage, or members of our entourage, drinking beers. It holds on a man sitting on the edge of the roof now. We pull back in kind of a wonder of sorts, showing all these men relaxing, drinking beers. We show Hadley coming in, actually being nice, drink up, right? And drinking a beer himself. And then we find Red, and drinking his beer. Then we see Andy. Actually, I think it's William Sadler who leads us to Andy. Either way, Sandler, who had some conflicts with him, brings a beer over to him. "Andy, why don't you have a beer?" And we see Andy sitting off to the side with this wonderful, just beaming with happiness. And and we hear that narration of, talking about they felt like lords or something like Morgan Freeman talking about how they felt like they could have been tarring a friend's roof, and it just adds that narration of just punctuating this beautiful scene where they feel like real men, and Andy then um, um, telling Sandler as he's offering the beer, "No thanks, I don't drink." And he's got that wonderful smile on his face as he says it. And in that moment, we truly fall in love with Andy Dufresne. We now understand why he is exceptional, why he is the main character. And then we cut back with the last of that narration as Morgan Freeman takes his swig of beer, and we're out, and it's, once again, it's such great punctuation to that scene. And I liked it more than the opera scene, because it just felt like it's him and his group of friends, and it's the first time we see him truly be special. And so that's scene number 3. Let's talk about scene number 4.
Scene 4.
So now we're moving on to scene 4, and this is a special scene among the 5 because we're changing the narrator here. This is the Brooks is released kind of montage, the letter sequence. This is interesting because just making a note before we start that unlike, I think, most prison films that I've seen, the escape has never been discussed. It's been joked about with the rock hammer, but there's been no discussion of escape, which is truly unique in a prison film, and why the finale is so surprising. Because what the film's language, the story says, parole is what we all wait for. No one tries to escape. Nobody. And so this man is finally being released legally. All right. And so we just keeping it in mind that for all these people, because remember, every single person in that group has not left. The only person who's come in has been Tommy. The only person who's left is Brooks. Everybody else is remaining the same. So these are lifers. This is their life. So this is foreshadowing what will happen to them. So as in this first scene, we'll see that right before the scene starts, we see Brooks is freeing Jake, his crow, and Darabont makes a point of setting this in the dark library. So turns all the lights out, puts him in a dark suit, which reflects what we feel, that Brooks is afraid of being released. But he's releasing Jake, so he's truly now alone in this next sequence on the outside. Jake was his friend, he took care of him. But so the release of the crow sets up this letter scene. We then see him in this next image being released. We see him stepping out and being saying farewell to the guards very quickly, and he walks into a medium with a slight zoom. It stays there because he's not sure. This is somebody who is like, he's just not sure. He's a babe in the woods. And this next image right here of him in the bus with brilliant use of Whitmore, looking terrified as he grips the back of that seat. It's one of the most memorable images for me in the entire film, and sets up, once again, what the others may feel, right? Because this is what all of them are going to experience. As the narration starts, where he talks about the automobile, very simple device. We see him on the street here. We see him almost being run over. A man out of time. Once again, this is something they're all going to experience when they get out. Their technology is going to pass them by largely, right? In this case, Brooks in the automobile is such a great instance. And it also allows production value to see, because this is really heading past the hour mark, as I remember. So this is allowing visual variety. We're seeing the world outside. We're seeing production design. We're seeing costumes. We're seeing period outside, right? And so the vintage cars, really make you appreciate the work done there outside of the prison. We then see him step into this room at his halfway house. And this room is pretty awesome for many reasons, but mainly we all know that as he steps in, we see this room next to the bedroom, and we see that the kind of the detail, the series of bars up top, which of course were put in because they will be used later in the sequence. They're just a piece of they're just a detail at this point, because it's these railings up top that Darabont's going to use so perfectly in the finale of this. So this is obviously stage work here, right? To set up the finale. We then show with the halfway house and the supermarket. Once again, it allows you to give period details, which is great. We get to see the world outside. We get to get a sense of period. But this will be called back later, and it's so brilliant the way that that Darabont once again never discusses escape, but says this is what parole is going to be like for Red. Now we're not thinking about Red so much because this is largely Andy's story. So this is a really smart sequence for many reasons. There's going to be callbacks both to this job. So that's why this is needed, and to this room, right? The only instances where it's truly Brooks's scene is the feeding of the birds, and it's a lonely shot. He's by himself. Jake was his best friend, so this is truly Brooks's moment. This isn't going to be called back for Red later. Once again, really great choice, because we almost feel culturally, I feel like we feel sorry for old people feeding the birds, like they have nothing better to do. And then we see him not being able to sleep, and that's something that's universal. We feel sorry for him once again. When we show him packing up, and the use of the voiceover, and maybe I can shoot the manager and so on. But we see him packing up. We see him putting his clothes in and saying, "I've had enough." And we think that he is going to leave, like he's going to escape, that he doesn't want to do the job anymore. Maybe that's why we're showing the manager again. But we see him in this instance, we see him getting his penknife out, and we see him getting up on that table. And we're not sure what he's doing. But what's awesome is that Darabont uses that, shoots through that detail of the little bars at the top of that entryway to set up this kind of like he's never escaped from prison. It's one of my favorite shots in the movie, right? And so we're given that little detail. We're then keep showing his feet on this table, and then we are. I don't know how many people are actually surprised by this per se. I was surprised by it because we don't see a rope, we don't see anything, but we see him kick the thing away, the table away, and him hanging, and then that final shot with that beautiful little spotlight on Brooks was here as we get that beautiful image of him hanging in that room off that kind of railing up top. It's such a gorgeously lit, gorgeously framed image. But remember, we then have this little punctuation at the end where we have Andy reading the scene, reading the letter, and just that moment where Red punctuates that narration, the narrator saying he should have died in here before we cut, and that is just perfect. That is setting up in a very subtle ways what Red was going to experience and his own feelings, his own story, which of course I don't think we're thinking as much about, because we're thinking about Andy's story. Andy's kind of largely the character we care about, right? So that is my scene 4. Just incredible filmmaking. So let's go on to scene 5.
Scene 5.
So we're down now to scene number 5. And scene number 5 was really hard to select because I had many of them I thought were great. But I really wanted to talk about the end, because I felt like if we're going to talk about the narrator and we're going to talk about his arc, then that scene needs to be Red's and not Andy's. So the prison break free scenes and so on, those are great. But I want to choose the letter scene leading into the end. Now, the letter scene, I'm going to start off not with him heading into Buxton, but start off the scene with him walking up that path, right? Walking down that side trail and seeing through the trees and seeing one of the most beautiful cinematic trees I've ever seen in a movie. It looks like it's just enormous. And it just says, this is important. That ginormous tree with that rock wall leading straight up to it. And so we see Red in this frame here. We see Red. We see him walking up along that old rock wall, and we see that wide shot as we hear that. More importantly, we hear Thomas Newman's score, which is I think does equal weight to the narration. We hear this beautiful score as he walks, and we see just how large this tree is in this field that Andy had mentioned earlier when he talked about possibly escaping. That there's going to be a box buried under a strange volcanic rock in a field where under a tree where he made love to his wife and proposed to her. So this field is important, and now it looks like we found that field, right? Just to give you context. So this tree is larger than life already, right? This is the tree that Andy proposed to this woman, who, of course, he murdered, or was murdered, and he was blamed for the murder. So we get to that rock wall, and we're all screaming for him that, we want him to find this box. And Darabont doesn't make us wait for it, right? Which is smart, because it's there, right? We've identified the rock wall, the tree. And so he finds that box, and you'll see in this image, he digs finds that volcanic rock and sets it aside. And we see this wonderful old aged, he pulls out this box that with a cruise ship. Looks like something from the 30s, just a tin. And what's wonderful is that now the narration is not actually, it's the reading of a letter, right? And so he opens this up, and he opens up the box, and he finds a plastic envelope in plastic, couple of envelopes, one manila and one just a regular letter envelope. He looks inside and sees some 50s. And each time, what's great about Freeman is his instincts to look around him. I love those quick looks. First, when he finds the box, he sits down, right? He's got his old man kind of beat hat on and his tie loosened. And he looks around really quickly. He finds that money, sees that money, looks around again. Like, there's fear in his eyes, Just wonderful performance. Then we get the reading of the letter, and we hear Andy's voice, and it's such a comfort to us as he talks about, do you remember the name of that town they talked about earlier when they were talking about dreams, that wonderful scene between them in the prison yard, get busy living or get busy dying, which is said, I think it's said by Andy. Can't remember. I don't think it's in the letter per se, but it's reiterated in the narration, get busy living, get busy dying. But this wonderful letter, hearing Tim Robbins' voice, knowing he escaped, confirming his escape, which makes us feel good. But that's not the payoff, right? Because he finishes reading that letter, and I love, he signs it, your friend, Andy, like your friend, acknowledging their friends, and asking him, like, if you're willing to go farther, I'd love for you to come down. He mentioned him helping him with his hotel and getting his boat in Mexico, in Zihuatanejo, I think is how to pronounce it. And we then cut to these gorgeous shots as the score plays, and he's walking through these rural fields, and, get busy, get living, get busy dying, absolutely goddamn right. And we pay off and go back to the room where Brooks died. We see him, we see Red pulling out that knife, and quickly, and as he walks out, we see that Brooks was here, so was Red. So we pay off Brooks's demise in some way, right? And show that he's escaping conformity. He's not going to be a prisoner anymore. We show this him standing in line, and we hear this wonderful narration of what his hopes are. You know, so that his traveling to Texas, to that border town he mentioned earlier, and then that wonderful bus shot, that hero bus shot, that is just a perfect ending for this movie, with him talking about his hopes once again, that and one arm out, standing out, because one arm is sticking out of the window, so it draws our attention to him, and then seeing that bus disappear as we hear his hopes. I hope the Pacific Ocean is as beautiful as he says it is, and we fade into that, dissolve to that Pacific Ocean, beautiful Pacific Ocean, and we see that beach, and we see that Red is got his shoes off, and his hat flies off, and his tie is loosened, and we see Andy working on his boat, and we see them coming together, and it's just such a great emotional payoff. And it's not only a payoff, it's not a payoff for Andy, it pays off the narrator, and that is what truly makes this movie special in looking at that voiceover narration, because that secondary character, who's the narrator, gets an emotional climax, an emotional resolution. So that is my. I don't usually choose the endings of movies, as it pans away and it shows the beautiful Pacific Ocean and goes to credits, but I just think that that's truly a great scene. So yeah, that's our last scene. Let's wrap up.
Wrap up.
So that was 5 great scenes. That was Shawshank Redemption. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did in rewatching it. I think a movie like Shawshank is truly film literature. Like a great classic book. It's one that you can pick up decades later, having had memories of great appreciation, and find something new and find something to connect to because you're a different person. And I think there's a reason why it's number one on IMDb as one of the top films of all time, if that's like the top film of all time. It's really I think one of the last, if not the last, great classic film literature movies that you have to see. So with that said, I'd love it if you click like, and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I'd love it if you have scenes that I missed or scenes you want to talk about, please place them in the comments below, and as well as any thoughts on the things I discussed. I'd love to engage you on that level. I always love comment sections, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks so much.